effect of everything we've heard on the economy and on the pockets of you and I. Dr. Asuming, how nice to see you. Thank you very much for making the time.
Good morning. Good morning to your viewers.
Wonderful.
It's a pleasure.
Now, perhaps we'll start with the city. Dr. Bawumia sought to explain the reasons behind the recent depreciation. And he pointed to the IMF. He basically said that some preconditions that the IMF set ended up tying the hands of the Bank of Ghana when it came to accessing our gross international reserves. And as a result of this, when speculators started to cause the cedi to lose value, the Bank of Ghana's hands were tied and they were unable to react the way they normally would by accessing these gross international reserves. Tell me, from a technical point of view, does this explanation sound like what could have caused what we experienced?
Certainly, yes. It could have been part of the causes, but I wouldn't say it would be the only cause or the main cause. Because, so I think Dr. Bawumia, economist as he is, he clearly explained what drives the exchange rate.
Yeah.
The fundamentals are simply the demand for dollars versus the supply of dollars. So what has happened in the last couple of years is that our trade balance has improved. That means that we've been exporting, the value of what we've been exporting is now higher than the value of what we've been importing. So if you export more, export is the primary source of foreign currency, that's the dollar. And then import is the primary demand. But there are other things. So there are things like foreign firms who need to repatriate their profit in dollars, and then also other investors who have invested in our bond market who sometimes need to take back their investment. So I think we have to separate the fundamentals. The fundamentals will be that if you check what the balance of payment analysis has been saying, it tells us that yes, we are doing well on the export side. But so the trade balance is in a surplus. But if you look at the balance on services, that's where when people are exporting, repatriating their profit in dollars, that's where it will show up. If you see that, you realize that it's been in a huge deficit. So for me, I think that's a big part of it. In the past 2 years where the trade balance has been improving, that means that we should be getting more dollars. On the other hand, because the economy, the services sector is increasingly dominated by foreign firms who need to repatriate their profits, and also because we've borrowed a lot and we have to service those interest payments. It means that the demand for dollars on that side has picked up. So I think, what he's saying is that maybe you would have had the dollars, the Bank of Ghana would have had the dollars to put on the market, but it still doesn't change the fact that, based on just the fundamentals, and I think he likes to talk a lot about the fundamentals. Based on the fundamentals, it means that the demand was there. We just didn't have, we were constrained from putting up the supply to meet it. But, let's think, I think his explanation is purely why the Bank of Ghana didn't respond by putting dollars on the market. Right. Not that, the fundamentals really, it has improved. But, some aspects has improved and some aspects have gotten worse.
But I suppose, he is trying to explain a specific period in time. That is basically this year, the depreciation we experienced over the past, let's call it 2 months. So would that explanation be sufficient to cover that specific period? Our currency just has been depreciating at a slower rate over time since since forever. But his explanation for that specific period of the very sharp dip, would that match, what he said about the gross international reserves and the IMF?
Yes, partially. I think there are a lot of, first of all, if you compare, year on year, first quarter, this depreciation looks unusual. It's unusually higher than you usually see. Yeah. But so it means that partially what he's saying is that one reason why the cedi was allowed to depreciate at that time is that, whatever the fundamentals were, the central bank was not pushing as much dollars because we needed to meet that. But I don't think that's the only thing that was happening.
Right.
One, since last year, the U.S. has been raising rates. That means that you investing in the U.S. has become more attractive to investors. So some investors will definitely try to pull their cash. Secondly, usually around the first quarter, when first quarter is coming to an end, foreign companies need to, do their reporting and then repatriate dividends. So that is part. But what is unusual in this particular instance, what was unusual is that we were also exiting the IMF program.
Yeah.
So there might have been some jitters. And, so yes, it's likely that the demand for dollars around this time was slightly higher than normal. That's not his explanation. But the other side, which would be his explanation, is that while the demand was unusually high, maybe we were constrained from putting more dollars on the market to meet that demand.
Right.
So on the balance, if you put the two together, maybe if the central bank was pushing more on the market because there was no IMF constraint, maybe the cedi depreciation wouldn't have been as much as it was. But clearly, I don't think that's the full explanation.
Right. Okay. Now, since he is offering an explanation, the indication is that perhaps he knows what caused it. Now, if that's the case, then how does that sit against the finance minister's recent call for some bipartisan probe into the structural reasons behind the depreciation of the currency? Are these conflicting, calls?
To be honest, I was very surprised to hear that we are setting up a bipartisan committee to probe. Don't forget, I think 2 weeks earlier, the president himself had some conversation on the cedi, and I'd explained that we don't know what causes the cedi to depreciate over the long term. So I think for me it was a surprise. I don't think we really need, it's not rocket science. And politicians, finance ministers, people in government for a long time have identified that ultimately we need to reverse the negative current account balances. That's the fundamental cause. I think we don't need a committee to set up to tell us why the cedi is depreciating.
Could it be that they are seeking to take certain actions that they are concerned might be unpopular, and so they want to have a bipartisan buy-in so that it doesn't seem like a political hit to them? For example, if they want to start import substitution, there's a massive constituency of people who would lose out. Do you think perhaps it is things like that they are seeking to kind of shore up support for before they take action?
I think that if we are seeking to take, measures, fundamental measures to halt the persistent depreciation of the cedi, you don't really need. Generally, when the cedi depreciates, it bites a lot of Ghanaians.
Yeah.
So just, majority of Ghanaians will definitely be supportive of any measures that you put in place to halt the depreciation of the cedi. Yes, there's a big and a very vocal and politically active constituency who will not be for it. But ultimately, there's a way to deal with that, not necessarily forming committees. There's a way to deal with that. One way is to simply, bring them to the table and strategically think about how, whatever they have been importing, how they work with, they'll be part of a coalition of local producers where, we see what arrangement we can do so that they don't lose too much of their business. So if it's encouraging them to gradually start supporting domestic production of those import substitutions, those are things we can do. I don't believe in this idea of setting up that committee.
Right. Now I think this moves us very smoothly into the other big announcement from yesterday, which is the reduction in the benchmark values of imports. And the vice president, got a massive cheer when he announced this. Of course, further analysis later clarified the detail of what he's actually saying. But without going into the technicality of whether it's going to be benchmark values or the actual, the reality is that we are going to see a reduction in the import duty for some of our imports. Let's talk about the impact that will have on the economy.
Okay, so let me start with some background.
Sure.
That will possibly explain where this has come from. So on Monday, I think 1st April, when the Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of Ghana released their latest press release, there was a line about the fact that, this year, the first quarter, there's been revenue shortfall.
We've missed the target again.
We've missed the target again, and we've done that consistently for the last couple of years. But the other explanation that the Bank of Ghana added was that most of the shortfall was because of shortfalls in revenue from trade. So, and the Vice President also gave some very good background. I think they deserve credit for the amount of research and the evidence that they are putting into this. So they have done the analysis and realized that yes, Ghana's ports are not competitive, and they are trying to do something. But I think it's not just about the story about the importers. It seems to me that there's a big story about government trying to boost revenue with this measure, because what they are trying to do is that if they reduce the port charges, then they will be able to bring in more volumes, and then that will mean that even though it looks like the amount they get per unit is lower because there are higher volumes, then we end up getting more revenues. So I think that's the background. It seems to me that it's not just to appease importers or people at the port, but also there's some revenue underlying need to raise more revenue.
Right.
In terms of what the potential impacts on importers, there are several ways of looking at it. One is that some people have argued with some justification that, look, what is happening is that people are shipping things through Lome, and that some of the goods that Ghanaians are importing, they only use Lome as the route, and that the goods will eventually end up in Ghana.
Right.
If you talk purely from that point of view, you think that, well, then there wouldn't be much of an impact in terms of domestic producers, because these are goods that are entering the country anyway. On the other hand, the government will not be raising more revenue, which it can commit to other things. So that's one side. But there's also the other side, that, well, ultimately you are going to make imports, imported items, the final price will look cheaper. And that is where domestic producers will have some concern. I think we need to think about this more broadly, and in terms of a broader industrialization strategy and where we want to go to with that. Clearly, we need to make things at the port much smoother for both exporters and importers. We have to make things work more smoothly at the ports. But beyond that, in terms of what we do with imports, new taxes or new measures to raise revenue, we really need to think about what the industrialization strategy is and what is the role, what is the vision. So we have 1D, 1F, and then we've also seen not long ago the Trade Ministry announced support for some Ghanaian companies who were struggling. So these are all pockets, but I think we need to, and I'm glad that the planning minister was there, we need to think about broadly, what is the plan? So we have 1D or 1F. What is the strategy? What do we want to achieve with manufacturing in 2 or 3 years? And what role do we want tax policy to play? It seems to me that recently there's too much emphasis of using the tax policy just to raise short-term revenues, and I think that has to stop. The tax policy is a very important industrial development tool, and we need to think strategically about exactly what industries we want to support, what industries we want to promote, and exactly what is the strategy. Then from there we derive where we impose import taxes or where we increase import taxes.
So I guess what I'm taking away is that you would have liked to see more evidence of a bigger plan.
Exactly.
Into which this strategy will fit.
Yes.
Because it would appear as if we have an aim of ultimately changing the fundamental structure of our economy, then what we really want to do is we want to turn around our imports dependency, and perhaps making our imports cheaper will fight against that. Is that what you're seeing?
Oh yes, clearly, if you make imports cheaper, then you make it difficult for domestic producers to compete. Mind you, there are so many goods coming from countries where companies receive massive government support, and in this country, businesses, manufacturers, everybody has to struggle with issues with weak infrastructure and how costly it is. We are struggling with issues with electricity supply, reliability, and then cost. So ultimately, we need to think about, okay, yes, we have 1D, 1F. This is our industrial plan. And at this stage, we feel that this is what we need to promote. And this is the support that we need to do, so that we fit everything into that strategy, not just, once in a while, you need revenue here, let's impose taxes on this, let's do these revenue measures. I don't think that's how to build a sustainable long-term economy.
Right. Now, yesterday we heard from Madam Gov't, who coincidentally used to be the CEO of the Ghana Export Promotion Authority. Now, she, in her own right, is a local manufacturer of, among other things, fruit juices and coolant. Now, she said that as far as she's aware, from the Ghana Standards Authority, she's the only manufacturer of coolants who has been assessed by the Standards Authority, so she's not aware of any others doing that. But there are lots of coolants on our market, which means they are all being imported. And if these coolants end up cheaper because of the recent announcement, then her business is likely to be wiped out. Are you seeing this as a possible short-term effect of this recent announcement? Are we going to possibly see some businesses unable to cope?
Without a doubt. I think, when you have blanket reductions like that, you have to look at the composition of our imports. There are some industries who actually benefit, make no mistake, because if primarily what we import are inputs, then this reduction will actually help you. It will help your cost of production. But if, like, the former president you referred to, if you are a domestic producer like her, then you are definitely going to be worse off. And I think that is where I always talk about, I've already spoken about what the plan is. So, and then whether this could have been a little bit more targeted. So we say, okay, for this type of industries, for this type of producers, we really need to encourage local production. So whatever we are doing, even if we streamline port measures, that will have a negative reduction in those imports. Then we can put in additional measures to raise, maybe import duties on those items, so that we sort of have a plan to protect domestic producers like that. So I think, it all comes down to what is the plan? What are you trying to do? How does this feature into our long-term development plans? Not just, once in a while. Yes, it might appease some importers. It might temporarily bring some relief, but we need to think long-term. Because once we keep encouraging import, we are simply shipping more jobs abroad, which is something that came up yesterday.
Yeah. Now, speaking of yesterday, it was entirely an economic discussion. So, to wrap up, give me your general impressions of the entirety of what we heard yesterday, not just from the Vice President, but from the other members of the EMT, the answers to the questions and so forth. Give me your analysis. What impressed you and what did not?